Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of Pulumi for IT Pros. This week we're going to have a look at state storage and how that works when we get beyond a bit of the basics. So you'll remember from earlier videos where we talked about this that Pulumi is a stateful language, but like Terraform, it has a state file. And the state file is where Pulumi records all of the operations you undertake when you're deploying your infrastructure and all the details of the infrastructure that get deployed. This means that that state file then allows us to do more advanced techniques that you can't necessarily do in stateful languages. This then means that we're able to do some things that you can't perhaps do in other languages that don't have state, destroy operations and preview operations and things like that. But it does come with a downside in that you have to store that state file. It has to go and live somewhere. And actually with Pulumi, there's a second piece as well, which is a good thing in that Pulumi encrypts the secrets in that state file. But that now also means you have some requirements to manage a key for doing that encryption as well. So we have to deal with those. Now, up till now, we have been doing our deployments using a local state file and a password for the key. So all of our state file gets stored on my desktop machine, and when I run it and it's not accessible to anyone else, it's just on my machine, and the encryption is all done with that key that we type in when we do a deployment. And that works fine for when you're just doing some testing or trying things out, doing some local dev that no one else needs to work with. But as soon as you start doing anything a bit more serious, having that state stored on your local machine is going to become a pain. It's risky because if your machine dies, you've lost all that state information. It's potentially not stored in the most secure way. And yes, those secrets are encrypted, but it's on your machine along with the password. So that's not necessarily the best place for it to be. But probably most importantly is if anyone else wants to work with your infrastructure as code, they won't be able to. They can't get hold of the state file. So if you're working with teams who are going to be involved in this, or even if you're just trying to maybe create some pipelines later to do deployments automatically and those sort of things, the state file needs to be accessible to everyone who's working with that. And so we're going to want to change to using a different method for storing that state and that encryption key. And we have a look at two methods today. So the first one is going to be the Pulumi service. And then the second one is we're going to have a look at using Azure storage and key vault as an alternative to that. There are other ways. You can, if you're working with AWS or GCP, you can store your state files in there. There's documentation on that, and I'll put a link below the video, but we're just going to focus on those two. So let's have a look at this. So we are going to first off look at using the Pulumi service. So this is a SaaS service that Pulumi offers to store your state file and manage your encryption for you. That makes it very easy to get all that set up without having to set up services yourself or anything like that. There is a free version, and we're going to use that in the demo. So if you're working on personal projects and stuff, you can absolutely use the free version. There is obviously a paid version for enterprises and for larger scale projects and so on. But the first thing I want to be clear on is you do not have to use the Pulumi service. There are alternatives, including the one we're going to look at after this, which is using Azure components to store the state file. You don't have to use the Pulumi service, but it does have some benefits in terms of simplicity, doing a lot of the management work for you, but it does also offer some additional features around your deployments. Makes it easier to view what deployments are going on. You can actually have the SaaS service run the deployments for you as well. So there are some benefits to doing it, and it's worth looking at if you're interested, but don't feel like you have to use this. So let's get started and test that out. So you remember when we first ran it before when we wanted to use the local state, we ran the Pulumi login command with the local flag. So we ran that. We actually spelled it right, but you get my point. So what we're going to do here is we are going to log in to the SaaS service, and all that involves doing is doing Pulumi login without any additional flags. Okay, I had a slight issue there in that it cached some of my logins. That's why it was trying to log me in with the local provider without that flag on. But if we do that again, so if we run Pulumi login after I'd logged out, and what this will now see is it wants to log into the service, and we can either we have to authenticate to that service, and so we can either enter an access token, which we can get from the service, or the easiest way, if we hit enter, it will open up the Pulumi service in a browser. And I've just logged in here, so it'll ask me for my credentials. I've logged in, and I can continue to my dashboard here. This is what the Pulumi console will look like in terms of, this is where you can review what projects you've got and so on. But if we go back to the command line, and we are now logged in with the Pulumi service. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project that's going to use that state storage. So let me just, let's stick that in temp. So I'm going to make a folder in the service, and then we're going to create a new project. So we'll do Pulumi new, And we'll do Azure Python. Yeah, we'll just call it Pulumi service. That's fine. And we'll set the defaults. We're going to give it a stack name, service dev, and call it whatever you want. Now, we want this to go inside my organization. So I'm going to prefix it my org name. So we can have a look at this in a minute, but in the service you have organizations, which is how you group together things. And you can have one for your company, one personal one, and so on. This one is mine. So I'm just going to put that inside that organization and then give it a stack name of server-dev. Service.dev. Yeah, we'll take the defaults. That's fine. And that's going to go ahead and then create the project like it always does with a new project. But it will create the state file in the Pulumi service, and it will use an encryption key and an encryption method that's set up in the service as well. So that's all managed for me. Obviously, I'm putting some trust into Pulumi there in terms of managing all that encryption for me, but it saves me having to do that. So obviously you have to weigh that up. And when we look in a minute at the Azure option, you're in more control of that encryption option, but you're having to manage some of that yourself. So, there are benefits and downsides to all these things. We go back over to the Pulumi dashboard. You can come in here, you can look at stacks, and you can see the different stacks that are in place. If we scroll down, we've got the new one, our Pulumi service stack, our Pulumi service project, and then we got the service dev stack. And you can see it's picked that up, it's the Python project, and we can go click on that and have a look. There's nothing been deployed from this yet, so it's currently empty. But we can, once we've actually got that up and running, I'll do a deployment and we can actually see it's filled in some of this information, and you can add things like a README to give it some more information. You can look at the activity that's happened. We can look at what resources have been deployed and we can get a sort of a view of those, and you can have a look at some settings in terms of integrations and things. But we'll deploy that in a minute and you'll be able to see what that looks like. So we've just finished the deployment, and you can see here, you can get some more information on deployment. So we can see any outputs from the deployment. We can see the configuration that was used. We can see any tags that are on the project. If we go into activity, we can see I ran this update, and you can even see the output of the command line that was run there. You can get some timeline information, so on. And we can see the resources that were created. So we've got a resource group and a storage account, and you can see an even link to them directly in the Azure portal. So there's quite a lot of nice features with the Pulumi service. So if you do want to go ahead and use that, you can get a lot of benefit out of it. But if you do go beyond the free plan, then obviously there is a cost to that. So you would need to assess that. The second option is that we can do something similar without the UI and everything like that, but we can use Azure storage and Azure Key Vault as the state provider instead. So what we need for that is a bit more work because we have to set it up ourselves. So in the Azure portal, and what we've created is a storage account and a Key Vault. Now, these are just the default deployments. There's nothing special I've done with them in Azure. There's a couple of things we're going to set up. So on the storage account, the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a container. I'm going to call it state. You can call it whatever you like. It doesn't matter. But we're going to do that. And then in the Key Vault, we need a key that we're going to use for encryption. So I'm going to go and generate a key. I'm going to call it Pulumi. You can take the defaults. That's all fine. And we'll just go ahead and create that. And we should have that key now. Okay. So what we're now going to need is a few items. The first thing we need is we're either going to need the storage account key or a SaaS token. So if you're not familiar with Azure, the key is basically the credentials for the storage account, but a SaaS token is a short-lived token, or relatively short-lived, depending on what you do with it, a token that will give you access to that storage account without having the sort of admin access key. We'll go ahead and do that. We're going to go to look at SaaS tokens, wherever that is, if I can remember. Shared access signature, that's what it stands for. And we're going to create one. We only need access to blob. That's what we're going to store them, so we can untick those. But we will tick those. We want all of those is fine. That's fine. And then we're going to set a date, and we're just going to make this valid for, in fact, I'll make it valid for a month. And you can obviously make it valid as long as you want or not. And hit generate SaaS token, and it'll give us the token. And we want to copy this one. And I'm just going to stick that into Notepad for now. And we will come back to using that in a minute. The other thing we're going to need is if we go back to the Key Vault and the key, we need the URL for the key. So if you click on this and get this, you can get the key identifier here, and we'll copy that and we'll paste that into Notepad as well. And we will come back to that in a minute. So we're going to go back to the CLI now for the rest of what we're going to do. Let me just clear this screen. We'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, so where with the Pulumi service we just use a simple login command, it's not quite as simple for the Azure storage piece. So basically we need to tell it the name of the storage account, and we need to give it that credential to access it. And so that we use environment variables for. So the first one we're going to set This is using PowerShell command to set the environment variable. If you're using Bash, you can use obviously the commands for that. But I'm basically creating an environment variable called Azure storage account, and I'm setting it to the name of the storage account. Then secondly, I am going to create another one, which is called Azure Storage SAS token, and I'm going to put that SAS token that we used a minute ago, copied a minute ago in there. If you're paying attention, what you will notice is that in the value you got from the Azure portal, it had a question mark at the beginning. I've dropped that. You don't need the question mark. So we'll just do that. So now we have those values set. We need to log in to the state storage account. So we're going to use the Pulumi login command again, but we're going to add this cloud URL parameter. And then the prefix is azblob, tell it it's using a blob account, colon, // and then the name of the container within that storage account. So that state container we created. So we're going to go ahead and set that up, and that should log us in, and that should be ready to go. Now that's sorted out the state file. That's going to end up in the blob storage. But what that hasn't dealt with is the key vault piece. And we do that when we actually initialize the stack. We give it some information on the secret provider. So this is the command we're going to run. So Pulumi stack init, we've run that before to create a new stack. And then we've got this secret providers property. And in there, you give it the name or the path to the key that we copied earlier. So you can see this is the name of the key vault, keys, and then the name of the key. When you copied it earlier, it probably also had a GUI at the end for the version number. You can leave it like that. That'll use a specific version. I tend to just drop it and it'll use the latest version in there, which is fine. And then we're prefixing it with its Azure Key Vault prefix to indicate that's where it's coming from. And so what that should do now, hopefully, is it will create us a stack, or we're going to create a new stack. And so we will call that Pulumi Azure Storage. And I forgot something we need to do there. So that's basically complaining that it can't talk to Key Vault, because for some reason, when you use this, it defaults to trying to use managed identity to do that. So when we're running it locally from our machine, we need to set another environment variable, this Azure Key Vault auth via CLI, so that's a true, so that then allows us to do that. The stack file that we just errored out on probably still exists, so I'm just going to do Pulumi stack rm for remove, and then this is the okay, and then it's going to run in it again, and hopefully this time it will not complain about that. So we've got a different problem. Oh yeah, so we're missing some permissions on Key Vault. So if we go back to the Azure portal, and if we go look in the Key Vault, and if we go down to access configuration, and how this is set up will depend on whether you're using Vault Access or RBAC. We're using Vault, so we'll just go to access policies, and this is my account, I've got access. I have got permissions, but if you scroll down, on the cryptographic operations, I haven't got the decrypt and encrypt permission, and I do need that to be able to encrypt and decrypt secrets using that key. So we'll just go ahead and save that, and that should now work. So if we go back to the command line, and we'll go ahead and remove it again. Let's run it again. There we go. That's worked that time. So if we just quickly open that up in VS Code, and you see we've got our two stacks in here. If we go have a look at the Azure one, there's nothing in here at the moment, except for the fact you can see that it has added that secret provider information that we added before, added it in here, and it's also generated the key, some encrypted details about the key, which is fine, but that's all good. What we'll do now is if we go back to the command line, and we'll just go ahead and up that one, and that'll go ahead and create the resources for us. Okay, that's deployed. So if we go back to the Azure portal, and let's just have a quick look in that storage account. Go over here, look in our containers, and look in state, and you can see now there's a Pulumi folder, and in here you've got stacks, and you can see that this is our state file for those resources. And if we quickly we just download that, you can have a look at that in VS Code. It just has all the information about the resources. So it's got, shows us there that we're using that Key Vault for the secrets provider. And then because you can see the resources. You've got the actual stack, you've got the provider, you've got the resource group, you've got the storage account, and so on. This is basically all of the information that Pulumi holds behind the scenes about the state of the resource. And so that's all been stored in Azure Storage for us. And that's pretty much it. That's how you can configure Azure as a storage provider and an encryption provider for state. As I mentioned, you can do other as well. If you have a look at the Pulumi docs, you can see there are various options listed in here. There is the service, and then there is the self-managed option, which supports AWS, S3, blob storage in Azure, Google Cloud Storage, any S3 compatible service, those sort of things. And then there's some more details on how to set those things up. So there's the S3 instructions, and GCP and so on. And you can get those set up using that as well. Ultimately, you're always going to come to a point where you need to move your state storage off your local machine. Using the local provider is not going to work unless you are the only person who ever uses your state file and you're happy with the fact that it's on your machine, you think it's secure, you can back it up appropriately and so on. But if you don't, then you're going to want to move it to one of these state providers, and then you can also add things on top of that. There's your storage, we could add a backup job on there to back up our state. We can lock down that storage to only be accessible from our network or maybe even only from our build agents. You can secure all that appropriately depending on how you want that to work. So you've got lots of options in terms of state files. Hopefully that gave you an idea of two of the common ones. If you want the simplest, easiest out of the box way to do it, then the Pulumi service will do that for you, but that might have a cost. If you want flexibility and you want to use your cloud provider and not have to pay any additional fees to Pulumi, you can do that with some of the other providers, but you're going to have to do a lot of the work to get that set up. I hope that was useful, and I will see you next time.